All right, I'll do this for Doug. We won't make you wait anymore. Okay, that was really lame, wasn't it? All right. Doug does that. It drives me crazy. Anyway, you're listening to Gazette Radio Hour with Doug and John on AM-1220 KHTS, Santa Clara's hometown station. Here with our special guest host, Robert Patrick Lewis. First of all, thanks for coming in again.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, now, we were talking about the whole legalization of marijuana thing. A couple things, and I think I want to break this down a little bit because it's one of those things that everybody knows is bad, but they don't quite grasp. California's budget issue, okay? The idea is that marijuana would be legalized and would be taxed, and there would be, like in Colorado, there's actually a surplus, and there's actually refunds being paid back to citizens.
Yep.
Okay. Kind of like the Alaska pipeline.
That's exactly what I was kind of.
I had a buddy who's an Alaskan. He's getting a check every couple months, and I'm like, oh, I had a brand new black Trans Am in high school. Aggravated the crud out of me. Anyway, so how bad is the budget crisis in California?
It's
from
pretty
what you
bad,
see?
and that's, the unfortunate thing is we like to say that we're in this free democratic nation, but in reality, we do have state-controlled media when they're the ones putting out the numbers. And so, like the unemployment data, right? They love to say that unemployment's getting better, that the numbers are changing. In all reality, it's funny math, right? So they're playing with the numbers. It's not so much that people are getting great full-time jobs that they want. It's that people are stopping looking for work, and new jobs are being created, but they're part-time or they're under what people should be.
Isn't it the Q ratio, I think is what it's called?
There are so many different numbers, and it depends on who you get. And so Janet Yellen was educated in a certain place, and I think she's a Yale graduate, and she has a certain kind, so she looks at a certain number because she's a labor person.
Right.
So she looks at the I, or there's a totally different number that most people don't look at, but that's where she gauges her stuff off of. And then there's other people who look at Q, and there's other people who look at this.
And people who drop out of the labor market, and their labor participation rate, which is always a big one. All right, so if California's that bad off, are we at a deficit yet? Are we spending more money than we make?
We're always spending more money than we make. I mean, that's the problem. So there's a great thing that I think Forbes magazine tracks every year, the ultra rich, right? So $30 million and above, where do they live, right? We want to put a tag on these guys' ears and find out what they're doing. So in 2013, last time they did the study, they do it every 2 years, there were 4,512 of these $30 million net worth and above living in Los Angeles. Okay. This year, there were 900 and something. So that means we've had an egress of that many, over 3,500 of the ultra-rich. And so that's a big problem because California, if you look at the tax laws, it doesn't make sense for the little guy, right? You seem like the system's kind of set up against you because it really is. It's set up for these guys. Our entire tax base in LA is paid by around 10,000 people, right? And so that's, you talk about fair share, they pay the majority of taxes for us, but they're leaving. Hollywood was a major tax base for California. They're leaving. Right? Is it just because the tax laws? Yeah, tax laws, political climate. There are, as much as people don't want to admit it, there are a lot of very conservative people. The more money you get, usually the more conservative you get, because you get kind of upset when you start paying taxes that are more than you ever thought you'd make, right?
That's true, too.
That's where a lot of them go. Tiger Woods, classic example. He lived in California. When he hit a certain number, I think it was $10 million, he realized he could move to Florida, not pay any of that income tax, and still come here whenever he wanted, but still have a house on the water, and not pay $5 million in taxes, right? Yeah, so no-brainer.
It's no-brainer, but we have to have, I know the whole libertarian argument, but there should be some government services. The government is expensive. Right. There's expenses for government. And you get that by raising taxes, or by having taxes, not necessarily raising taxes.
Actually trying to turn the government into an efficient machine, right? Okay. So that's, at UCLA, that's what I did, was process improvement. I used a lot of lean management. I did Six Sigma at Raytheon. Now I do theory constraint stuff. Right. So there are a lot of management practices out there that essentially, if you know anything about any one of these, they'll tell you just how destroyed the government is, right? We have 15 people doing a job that one should really do. We've got people that are completely incompetent that you essentially can't fire. We have, that famous $30,000 hammer that the Pentagon pays for.
Yeah, right? and the Department of Redundancy Department.
Yeah, well, and that's, so being in the Army, anybody that's worked in government, there's a thing called end of the year buy, right? So you're given a budget. So let's say I get $10 million this year. Right. If I only spend $9 million, the next year I only get $9 million. So at the end of the year, everybody in the government essentially goes, hey, we got to spend this $1 million or we're not going to get it next year. So who needs rubber bands? Who needs Oakley sunglasses? Who needs this? Right. And it's pure waste. It's pure waste, but they have to do it for budgetary concerns. Okay, but so we're at a deficit. Let's just talk California right now. We're in a deficit in California, okay? How bad is that? Aren't governments basically built on credit to a certain extent? Yeah, and so, there are a lot of people that talk about the American dollar being a fiat currency and how that's so bad, but most of the world is really on a fiat currency at this point.
What do you mean by a fiat currency?
So if you looked on a dollar, I think it was, I can't remember what year, I'm at a loss right now, but it used to say, it used to be a gold-backed dollar, right? So for every dollar that we had in print, we had to have that much gold actually sitting in the treasury somewhere. We had to have it sit in Fort Knox or wherever we had it. It's no longer that, right? So now the dollar is just a promissory note, so its only value is on the full faith and credit of the United States government, which isn't quite what it used to be. And so that's the issue, is when you get all these different countries that's what it is, the dollar, the value of the dollar can fluctuate greatly. And the majority of the value of our dollar right now is based on it being the reserve currency. So anytime anybody in the world, two countries trade, they trade in dollars rather than trading between their own two.
Right.
We also use the petrodollar. So anytime somebody buys a barrel of oil right now, it's bought in the United States dollars. Right. So China, Russia, Iran, a lot of our enemies right now, they're trying to go away from the dollar as a reserve currency, and they're trying to go away from the petrodollar. Gaddafi, he had tried to go away from the dollar as a reserve currency. He wanted to make this gold dinar, which would have been like the euro of Africa.
Right.
And we invaded him a month later. Go figure.
It's that important.
They're trying to go away from the dollar as a reserve currency. And when you look at that our dollar is no longer backed by gold, that it's just the full faith and credit of the United States government, and that it's based on that idea that it's a reserve currency, once that goes away, so does the value. And so that's the thing that's scaring a lot of people right now. And, when we're keeping interest rates this low for this long, it's destroying the value of the dollar every time.
Okay, so the dollar goes down. Okay, let's break this down for normal folk. Okay, I mean, I get it, and I understand it, and that's always been a concern of mine. But all right, so the government should have. We'll do micro government. So California. Okay, they have to operate. Okay, if they operate at a deficiency, that's fine. There's a little bit of credit. There's bonds that are sold, and there's a little bit of income and commerce in that particular realm.
Yep.
But how bad? So okay, the $80 trillion or $18 trillion federal deficit has got to be bad, because that's going to get paid back at some point in time. You think?
We get invaded.
Unless we get invaded, yeah. It sounds like a really good book.
Read the Black. Yeah,
it sounds like a good book. We'll talk about that after the break. But is it really something that we should be terribly concerned about?
Yeah, it is, because it's the point where there becomes a point where they're going to have to shut off social services, right? And so that's the thing that people get very, very upset. And what government employee do you know that's going to show up to work if they're not getting paid? Right, and that's a very big issue. So once the water goes down, once the competent people, it's not like another job where they can just get a temp. There are a lot of very important jobs that keep the lights on and the water running, that if those guys aren't getting paid, they're not going to show up. And so there's a lot of stuff we can do in goofy accounting, but it's going to come to a head. That was a big thing in the last political election, kicking the can down the road. There's not a lot of road left.
Yeah, that's a good point. All right, we're going to do more of this. We're going to cheer things up maybe when we get back. You're listening to Gazette Radio Hour with Doug and John on AM-1220. Our special guest is Robert Patrick Lewis. We're on Santa Clarita's hometown station, KHTS. All right, you do need to know. See, I'm getting better at this. All right, you're on the Gazette Radio Hour with Doug and John, and our special guest, Robert Patrick Lewis, on AM-1220 KHTS, Santa Clarita's hometown station. All you need to know to be in the know. See, I don't even need Doug anymore. Why is Doug here, guys?
I think somebody has lost a job.
Yeah. Oof. All right. So we were talking. We switched from the whole pot thing into the deficit. But there's a couple of things that you were talking about, and it kind of made me scratch my head a little bit. The full faith and credit, I get, and that's important. But and we're running out of road, I get that too. But how bad would it really be if the government says, okay, we're not going to spend any more money?
From my standpoint as a conservative libertarian, I think it would be pretty good. There would be some social chaos, but if you look at that old, the ancient allegory of the phoenix, right? That rises out of the ashes, flies towards the sun, bursts into flames. Same thing over and over, rinse, wash, and repeat. All societies get to that point where they kind of do. They get to a point where they have to kind of implode, they burn, and then they build back up from the beginning, right? It's happened in our society time and time again. Yeah. We have Wall Street crashes every 7 to 11 years. It happens, right? Yeah. We know there's a bad one coming, because even though the government's telling you right now we're out of this recession, we're not. And so if you have a crash in the middle of a recession, it's bad news.
Right.
And so maybe that will be the thing. Maybe we have to get to that point where people realize, or have to realize, they can't depend on the government for everything, right? At some point, you got to do something on your own.
Yeah, that's the huge thing. All right, so let's switch to something more cheery. Let's talk about Iran. So much better.
They're dancing in the streets there.
Yeah, you must. Yeah. It's got to be so much more cheery than talking about also economic stuff. Well, actually, let's take a step back. How do you think they feel about the Israeli election?
Not so. I think they're probably a little upset, and I think that's who knows, because you can't really verify it, but there's been a lot of rumblings that Obama was actually trying to influence that election against Netanyahu, that he was trying to get out. And I have this memory of the last election where Biden was talking so much about how close they are with Bibi. You know, everybody loves to pull out the Bibi when they're trying to say how close they are with Israel. And so to hear this, you know, it's one of those things that really had my head scratching, because to partner with Iran over Israel, you know, that, I mean, in America...
Well, do you think it's one of those things where we're naive enough or arrogant enough, you can take your pick, whichever way you want to go, that we actually think that if we bring them to the table, and we sit them, it's Thanksgiving dinner,
right?
And we bring them to the big kids table that they'll have really good table manners. You know, I mean, they'll be in their best behavior.
I don't think so. You know, and it's just when you have politicians, right? So we all know politicians are liars, no matter what country they're in. But when you have politicians that will outright say, we want the destruction of Israel, of another nation, that will say this and have been saying it over and over, that will put it out on their national Twitter feed, right?
Yeah.
I don't think you can take.
It's on their Facebook page.
Yeah, it's on
status. Get rid of Israel.
Here's my dinner. Death to Israel. Right? Exactly. Yeah. I don't think so. I don't think we could ever count them. And it always boggled my mind. How could anybody in America that's Jewish, that's a Jewish American or has Jewish background or even supports the idea of a Jewish state, at all support Obama? Because we've known for a long time that he has these kind of anti-Israel ideas, and it's been under the cover for a while. This is the most outright thing he's ever done.
It's been a head scratcher. You've nailed it. I don't understand the policy, and I'm not sure making a deal with Iran is... I read today it's close. I'm like, oh, good.
And that's the problem, is we don't know what's on the table. We don't know if things have been taken off. We don't know what kind of deal. We know, Bibi definitely doesn't like it.
Well, it's being brokered by Russia. We should be fine. We should be fine. It'll be great.
The most trustworthy guys.
Yeah, why not? I mean,
at least they're drinking good vodka.
Exactly. if you've got to make a deal, you better have good vodka. That one just stumps me. I don't understand. The other thing that I was talking about, General Petraeus came out and said that, the whole, remember there was a quote, the enemy, I think it was in Netanyahu's speech, the enemy of my enemy is not my friend. In this case, it's my enemy. Mm-hmm. Well, if you think about it, we're really fighting against ISIS and the Islamic State, for lack of a better term. Mm-hmm. Who really benefits in that region if we destroy them?
Yeah, well, that's the problem.
Iran.
Because at the end of the day, we got to know who's really funding them and where they really come from, right? So they're too well funded to truly be this underground sect that's not getting outside help. Right. And so at the end of the day, you really have to analyze where their help is coming from, who's funding them, who's arming them, who's training them. I know that I have friends that are in different elements of defense, that they were there training with other countries. So I don't know if I can say who the other countries were, but other countries that most Americans would never think we were allied with, right? And they were training up. They went there for 2 or 3 months, and they were training specifically to go hunt ISIS. And these are the guys that's what they do, right? These are the guys that, you talk about the tip of the spear. They're the tip of the tip of the tip of the spear.
Right.
And they went there. They did the train up. They were training with these other guys. They got all ready, packed and ready, and they got the call to come home, right? And so it's not like ISIS went away. But these guys that were spun up that do that got told to come home. And so... I don't know. There are conspiracy theories out there, and there are a lot of questions to who funded them, where the weapons came from, where all that stuff. You got to follow the money, and that's what it is.
I think there's a lot of it. The one that stumps me is okay. So we get rid of them, then there's going to be a power void to a certain extent.
Yep, and a lot of weapons out there.
And Iran is going to be going, hey guys, how are you? What's new?
Well, and that's the new paradigm of war, right? We don't have big red versus blue anymore. Russia and America, tanks on the inside of the battlefield. It's proxy wars. It's been proxy wars for a long time. That's what's going on all over Africa, Ukraine, Russia. When I was in Iraq and Afghanistan, we fought. And it's a well-known thing. Whenever we up north, we were fighting Chechens, right? Because their snipers were spot on, and they were the ones that we were fighting. We know that in certain parts, when I was in Karbala, we were fighting Iranians. We knew that their Quds, their special forces, were out there in large effect. And whenever you say that in popular media, you get, I've seen it with my eyes, man. I know that. Yeah. Like, I've picked the bodies up.
Okay. Here's a question. We got a couple minutes left to talk about this stuff, but I wanted to ask this, and I didn't tell you that I was going to ask you this. So is there one thing that you can tell us that people don't know that they would be afraid if they did know?
That people don't know
based upon your experience.
Oh, that they would be afraid of.
That they would be afraid.
They don't know about right now.
They don't know about right now.
If they knew so I had a friend, I'm trying to think of how many things I can say here. I had a friend that was in town over the weekend that he was in the Army, and he went off into a different type of job for a different organization.
Okay.
And we had a long, lengthy talk about that, about how war used to be scared about people coming to your borders and invading and causing mayhem and killing people.
Right.
But now what people can do with a computer is even more terrifying than what somebody can do with a gun. And the fact that the Chinese and Russian armies have had battalion-sized elements figuring out how to do that, hack into our everything, your personal phone, right? And what they can do to your life if they get in. I mean, they can destroy you. Wow. Just no matter what you do, all of a sudden there's pornographic images of children uploaded to your phone, and you're in jail forever.
Jeez. Okay. All right. So when we come back, we'll be talking basketball. I'm done with this. We'll talk a different kind of madness. We'll talk March Madness when we come back.
Much nicer kind
of madness. All right. You're listening to Gazette Radio Hour with Doug and John. Special guest Robert Patrick Lewis on AM-1220, Santa Clarita's hometown station, KHTS.